Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which is going to be all about nanotechnology marketing and specifically the challenges and recommendations for communicating about nanomaterials. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to introduce today's phenomenal guest, Tracy. But before I do, just a few key points about how you can get the most out of today's event. So we are recording the webinar, and we will be sharing an on-demand link with you in the next 24 hours. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share it internally or on your social media channel of choice with a key takeaway or something that you've learnt in today's session. If you experience any technical issues, these can normally be addressed by a quick refresh of the browser. Failing that, use the Q&A box to communicate with us, and we'll get you back up and running in just a moment. The format of today's event is that we're going to play a short video, 10 to 15 minute video presentation that Tracy delivered at a recent event. Following that, we're going to have an extended Q&A. I've got loads of questions to ask Tracy, but we'd love for you to be involved as well. So please use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're watching this on demand, you'll find the Q&A box in the bottom right corner. Obviously, if you're watching on demand and you send in a question, we won't get to it in the event, but we will follow up with you via email. So please do ask questions as and when they come to mind. Now, I am delighted to introduce Tracy Gay, who is the Executive Vice President of Marketing at Cerion Nanomaterials. And like I said, we're going to have a short presentation from Tracy to get things underway, and then followed by an extended Q&A. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, please do ask those as and when they come to mind. Right, so we're going to kick things off with the presentation first.
Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I'm excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite topic areas, communications, and the challenges that we face as nanomaterials organizations when communicating complex topic areas, including during a crisis of myth or disinformation. So to start off, for those of you who don't know who Cerion is, we're a company that specializes in the science of designing, scaling up, and manufacturing inorganic nanomaterials for companies developing products or systems. We were founded in 2007, so similar to Hannah, we are also celebrating an anniversary this year, 15 years. We have 3 facilities located here in Rochester, New York, our R&D lab, our manufacturing facility, and our corporate offices. And from here, we support a global base of customers in more than 40 different industries. So we're a services company. So when it comes to communications, we have a double challenge, both communicating what we do plus the science of it. So it goes a little bit beyond media. So let's talk a little bit about strategy and dive right into best practices and fundamentals when it comes to communications. Where to start? Fundamentally, you need to answer 4 key questions when developing communications. Who am I talking to? And for us, it's customers, prospects, media, analysts, academia, one of these groups, 2 of these groups, all of these groups. What's their background? What do they do? Is it a scientist, engineer, product manager, C-level? Could it be all of them? How are they going to interact with me? Are they going to come to my website? Are they going to find me on social media? Are they going to see me quoted in traditional media? Are they going to approach me at a trade show? Or, as we are today, listening on a webinar? So once you answer those 3 fundamental questions, the big question then is, how do I do it? How do I break down or simplify my message to be clear but come across as an authority? This goes for strategic communication as well as crisis communication. So for example, as I was preparing my presentation for today, I wasn't sure what most of your backgrounds were. I knew that you were probably either a user or maker of nanomaterials, but what was your job within the industry? Why would you be interested in what I had to say? Academic, company, industry organization member? So I tried to develop a conversation here that would resonate both with those familiar or unfamiliar with communication strategy. A few interesting tips and tricks along the way. So how then do you do it? When we're talking about an audience interested in nanomaterials, since they could range from highly technical to absolutely generalist. So a few things to keep in mind when it comes to messaging and messaging strategy. Start with identifying your core topic areas. What does your audience want to hear about? Secondly, stay in your lane. It's important that you don't overreach or try to tackle a topic that's not in your wheelhouse, or, as Hannah mentioned, answer a question from the media that you don't know the answer to, even if it's important to your audience. For us, we focus on 3 core competencies: Our competencies are design, scale-up, and manufacturing of nanomaterials. We have in-house experts that contribute to content and the topic areas, and the many subtopic areas that go along with them. So IDing your experts internally, who can and should speak on behalf of the company in times of strategic communication, so presenting on a webinar, or in times of crisis communication, reacting to media. You've hired or partnered with them for their experience. Use it. Once you've identified the what and the who, you can begin to develop some content. So as a practical example of this, we as a company identified synthesis methods as an important topic area to our key audience. It's in our wheelhouse. And we have experts on staff that can contribute to a piece of content about it. We subsequently published an article and on our website and on social media. And we developed several videos and articles as well on our website that are more strategic in nature for our less technical audience. So we have pieces that address our technical audience and our less technical audience on topics such as commercialization and global trends as it relates to nanomaterials specifically. So let's talk about how to develop that content, some key considerations and best practices that we use. Content development at its core is extremely difficult. If any of you have ever done it or had to write a paper or an article or a blog or have been asked to contribute to an article, you've identified the key areas that are interesting to your audience or a key topic that is timely and relevant. So where do you go from here? You're likely dealing, again, with a highly diverse audience, technical, non-technical, a number of job titles or industries. No matter what the topic area is, always use a few of these best practices to help you synthesize what you want to say. So outline your article, blog, video, or other vehicle, email ahead of time. This will pay dividends in the long run. It'll help you organize your thoughts and also think through the actual layout of the piece. Layout, including subheadlines and quotes, are much more important than you might think. The organization of the piece is key in making your communications clear and engaging your audience. Secondly, make the language as easy to understand as possible. As Hannah said, here's a true story. My son was working on his thesis in geochemistry. His advisor was like, too many words, simplify. No matter how many edits or iterations he went through, the research was solid. It was just the language he was using that made it difficult to read and understand. Take out the unnecessary or duplicative language. Once you made a strong point that's clear, just move on. So third, again, give examples. Use examples as a way to illustrate your point. Quotes from industry experts also go a long way to reinforce ideas, concepts, or create added credibility for your topic. Imagery. Sometimes the topics that we talk about when it comes to nanomaterials or science in general are much better illustrated with images, charts, graphs, anything but words. Use this tool not only to help reinforce your point, but draw the reader in, keep their attention. And first and foremost, I think Hannah mentioned this as well, we're all human. Your words are the link between the technology and the people who use it. Choose and use your words wisely to both make your point and make a connection with your audience. So now you've got your content. How do you get people to read it? What do you do with your content? For us as a company, we need to make sure that our content is used in a way that entices our audience to engage with us, wherever they are in their buying or development journey. That means ensuring we're available wherever they're searching for information. So how do you know where they are? This could involve some research on your end up front in answering the where are they question. This will help you identify which delivery methods you should use for your content so you can build credibility and thought of as you're continuing to build your authority with your key audiences. Consistency with messaging is critical across all of your engagement tactics. So your website, your social media, traditional media, radiate that message appropriately based on the delivery vehicle. Keep it simple, keep it regular. Consistency in communications is key. Secondarily, industry organizations like the NIA are a blessing for all of us. Understanding what like companies and individuals are experiencing and having a format for discussion and learning, and at the end of the day, policy influencing will help build a collective knowledge base and understanding of a complex topic area like nanomaterials. Equally, if not most importantly, being known as a key resource to your customer or your key audience and elevating your importance to them all the time, even when you're not working with them. So as a company, whether our key audience, companies that develop products or systems, have new projects, or even when they don't, it's critical to continue to be their resource for information. Ultimately, this creates an initial brand affinity, and once you work with them, brand champions. So thinking ahead, this is really important. You've got messaging, you've got a strategy, and you got some content as a starting point. Thinking long-term and also planning for the unexpected is essential to your communication strategy. You've got to continually ask yourself, what's next? This is never a one and done situation. Continue to be educated on current affairs, topics that impact the industry, new technologies, processes, or application areas, so that you can consistently develop relevant content and conversations for your audience. That's step one from a long-term strategy perspective. You also need to think about what happens if, or ultimately when, there is a paper published or a press release that creates a negative perception of the industry, a particular material, or even your business or your specialty area. We all know this is bound to happen. So prepare for it. You've identified your area of expertise. You have your experts in-house. Make sure you can activate them if and when it's time. I also absolutely recommend baking in media training to your long-term strategy for any and all of your team members. This is something we've actually done, and I can tell you it's an enormous help and very well received, particularly from our scientists. They're not experts in communications. It gets them comfortable and gets the entire team on the same page as far as consistent and clear messaging on behalf of the organization. So identifying an organizational spokesperson or subject matter expert for certain topic areas that can help craft your response in a crisis. One person and one person only should be the company spokesperson when it comes to responding to media to ensure the consistency, again, and that clear message. Reach out to your industry organization to gauge their response, get ahead of the swirl, and get everyone on the same page. Again, having this opportunity to connect with others in your industry, particularly in a time of crisis, is critical. Reaching out to key stakeholders, both internally and externally, making sure your internal team members, as well as your vendors, partners, and customers, especially in times of dis or misinformation, are armed with accurate and consistent information and updates. We all know we've seen it. It has happened a lot with COVID-19 and the mis and disinformation, as well as just internally policy, politics, and making sure everyone is on the same page when it comes to combating this virus. Additionally, proactive media outreach if necessary. So there are a lot of media that often, take hold of one topic area or one headline and propagate that mis or disinformation because they really don't know the whole story. Reach out to them, address it directly. So measuring success. At the end of the day, how do you know your message is getting across? How do you know you're making an impact? How do you know you're being clear? How are you influencing as a thought leader, as you'd hope to? Measuring success for us as a business is critical. We're constantly looking at data points to shift and adjust our communication strategy to ensure we're hitting several key milestones. First and foremost, building and maintaining our credibility in the industry, establishing new and deepening relationships with customers, partners, etc. And expanding our reach and developing new advocates based on thought leadership. So consistently expanding the audience of folks that we're talking to, folks that are hearing our message, and folks that we're engaging with, whether that's in person or via online opportunities. And finally, again, anticipating and mitigating negative industry perception. So have a plan. Okay, that's all I've got for today. Thank you again for inviting me. This is really just scratching the surface, as you know, when it comes to communication strategy. I only had a few minutes today, but I could talk forever about this topic area. So feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any additional questions, or now if you have any additional questions, reach out if you want to discuss any of these elements in more detail. at a later time, I'd be happy to have a conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. So, Tracy, that was very much just to sort of set the scene for everybody. We're going to dive in a lot deeper into a lot of those topic areas, if that's okay with you.
It sounds good.
I wanted to start off with the audience. So, you spoke about the importance of communicating with both technical and less technical audiences. I think you used highly technical and absolute generalist as your phrases. So what is the first steps in developing communication strategies for both of those two sort of personas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple of things that are critically important when you're developing your strategy. I mean, I mentioned mapping out messaging, value propositioning, providing a clear representation of what you do, how you do it, and what the value is to the customer audience. I mean, it's pretty simple. Always start with the customer, say what you do and what value it provides to them. That will really help you develop the messaging. And the second part of that is really take a look across industry organizations, peers, key themes at trade shows and other webinars and other public events that are happening in the nanomaterials industry. That will help you develop strategically key themes where you import your messaging into those themes. You know, as I mentioned on the presentation, we developed both technical and non-technical content. So we have a global trends series that's more of a thought leadership piece. And then we have articles on characterization and synthesis. So we do have some very technical content as well as some more content that's more interest-based and higher level. So that's kind of how we approach it.
So when you're developing those different pieces of content, obviously you're thinking about the different audiences, but are you with your teams? Are you working out on, do you develop personas internally? Do you have, this is our scientist persona, this is our product manager persona, C-level persona, et cetera, and what sort of tools do you use to put those together?
So initially when we were developing kind of the overall messaging and value propositioning for the business, when I came on board about 3 years ago, we kind of did a whole refresh, redo, relook at everything. So during that process, we did absolutely go about the process of developing each one of these personas in a brainstorming process with the entire team. So we had a technical representation, we had C-level representation, we had sales representation. So we went through a whole brainstorming process to collect a lot of information. We took that information and segmented it into those personas and then put into those personas kind of some key messaging, some key topic areas, some key sentences, some key phrases, key words that are important to each one of those. And from there, we kind of develop the messaging from there. I mean, there's absolutely some common threads that you'll see as you develop messaging for each one of those. But it is pretty important to understand your audience and really develop and use that as a jumping off point.
So you mentioned that you involved, or you had the other departments and key stakeholders involved. How important is that, do you think, when you're developing the messaging?
It's so important to really, I mean, for us, you know, our scientists are also our key audience. You know, they have that same mindset as the people that are coming to us for design services. So they really understand them because they are them. So involving them in the messaging it was critically important for us. And from a C-level, you know, our CEO thinks about things in a different way, maybe than the sales and marketing team does, or than the scientists do. So it was really key to involve everyone to get a different perspective for each person and each persona.
And then would you recommend that companies continue to sort of have those meetings where you get everyone involved so you can learn new insights from your audience, or do you have any particular sort of methods in place to get customer insights and things like that?
Yeah, so from a customer insights perspective, we actually did a survey earlier this year to kind of validate some of the data points that we were seeing coming in as we, you know, kind of track our successes and our not so good successes. So some of the survey that we put out, it really kind of asked folks how they like to receive content, right? We asked our key audience and our base how they like to receive content and what topics were important to them. So along with a few other things, but those were the key themes that we did throughout the survey to receive some of that feedback. And this is the first time we've done a survey. So that really served to validate some things that we were doing and invalidate some things that we were doing. So that, I think it's a really good way to get at least some kind of an idea of what your base is thinking about.
Sure. And were you surprised by the answers you got? Like, were there sort of internally held views that this is what our customers think, but then the insights told you something different, or
I think it was
pretty much as expected?
it was consistent with the data points that we were getting, and consistent with the feedback that we were getting. So it was very, very consistent.
Great. Let's move on to the messaging. So you've got your sort of key audience all set up. How do you hear a lot about simplifying copy so that it's sort of like written at grade 2 level or something like that? I'm not sure I necessarily completely agree with that, but how can you simplify sort of core messaging and while still coming across as authorities within your space?
Absolutely. And I mean, there could be two schools of thought there, really. I mean, it goes back to your initial value prop and building from there. So there are some core things that you do as a business really well. And those are the things that you talk about all the time. Cerion Nanomaterials, custom design and manufacturing. It says what we do and who we are. So, I mean, it's pretty simple when you think about it, right? Who you are and what you do. And what does that mean for your customers? But sometimes in this industry, you don't need to simplify the core message, especially if you're publishing, say, an article, a blog, speaking at an event. Chances are your audience is of the technical persuasion. So simplifying to a large degree, it might not even be necessary. So again, the messaging goes back to your audience.
Sure. It's interesting you say about like on websites, what you do, this is who we are and what we do. I was reading something today which basically said you can have the nicest looking website in the world with all the different widgets and whatever, but if it doesn't answer those two questions pretty quickly, then you're going to lose a lot of traffic very quickly.
Absolutely.
So one sort of common challenge that we hear a lot here at AZO is that the internal experts aren't always the best communicators. And I know you talked a lot about media training that you do internally. Is that how you support your internal people? Is that the best way to make people better communicators?
I mean, I think that's a good step in the right direction. I would absolutely recommend it. As I said in the presentation, I mean, it really, one, helps to get your more technical folks comfortable with communicating, because during that process, you're talking about the core messaging of the company, and they don't hear that all the time. So it really gets them comfortable with the core messaging is of the company, and they can weave that through. As far as we're concerned, it's worth every penny to do that. But I mean, the best way to get them comfortable with communicating, if they have an event that they are going to be presenting at, and typically us as the communications team are the ones that are putting them out there and signing them up for these events, so we know what they're going to be speaking on. Help them outline ahead of time and practice. Do some dry runs, walk them through the presentation, help them develop their presentation, add those charts, add those images, help them juice it up a little bit so that they're feeling comfortable. They have a good presentation. They're feeling comfortable with the content, and it's a really a good process for them. Develop some Q&A ahead of time that you think might happen during the event, and really try to get them comfortable with answering those questions. So, I mean, it's pretty simple. Outline, practice, practice, practice.
What about in the circumstance where they're going to be in front of a camera, say like on a webinar, or they're doing a sort of a walkthrough video? Is it the same sort of stuff? Practice, practice, practice?
It really is. And for that type of a scenario, we will record it ahead of time. A lot of time we'll record it ahead of time so that we can edit the video. And if they're uncomfortable with some of the language they use, they can do a redo. So that really has a tendency to work well with those folks and to get them over the nervousness, because they're not natural communicators.
Sure. Not something we can benefit from today, Tracy. So we'll have to be extra careful with what we say, as we are coming out live to a global audience. So what about, so you've got the internal experts, they help to build your authority within industries. What about external key opinion leaders? How important is it to work with them when you're trying to get your communications across?
I mean, I think it's a choice. And it's an internal choice if you're going to work with key opinion leaders. For us, this isn't the path that we've taken. For us, what we found what's most impactful is customer testimonials, customer case studies, which we can't get for the most part or use because of the strict confidentiality guidelines under which we operate as a business. So it's a huge challenge. So what we've done is developed our executive team as thought leaders. Primarily, our CEO is a key opinion leader in the space. Right now, he's the chairman of the Nanotechnology Industries Association. We have him out front in a lot of keynote speaking engagements, publishing articles, doing webinars, things like that. He's been in the industry at Cerion for 13 years. So he is also very well connected in the industry, has a terrific network of kind of go-to folks, industry leaders, government regulatory folks, as well as industry associations, as I mentioned, which we partner with on, events, webinars, sometimes in print pieces. So that's the way we kind of use key opinion leaders, but we're really trying to develop them on our own internally.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit more about your CEO then, if we may.
Sure.
So how much encouragement did they take for you to put? Was it their idea or was it the communication team's idea?
None at all. I mean, luckily, when I joined the company, a lot of those relationships were built well in advance. As I mentioned, I've only been with the company for 3 years. He's been here for 13. So that he's really built those relationships and nurtured them with like companies and other industry leaders, regulatory folks. So those relationships were already built, and it really did not take too much of a kick for him to get in front of audiences and do those things, because he's very comfortable with the content. Sure. He's comfortable with the information and the accuracy of it. So, and we have a great product, so it's not hard for me to get him out the door.
That's always very helpful when the product does a lot of the speaking for you.
Absolutely.
Do you, as a communications team, plan their sort of content strategy, or does it work both ways? Do they come to you and say, "Look, I want to do this event," et cetera, et cetera?
We pretty much do the groundwork, and the sales team has a big part of that, particularly when it comes to trade shows and other events and industry organizations that they think we should get out in front of. So that's kind of that's kind of the way that we develop. I mean, the marketing team really takes the lead and has taken the lead on that. But if we are kind of thinking about something and not sure that it's going to play, we do go right back to them and say, "Hey, look, what do you guys think?" We meet with our CEO once a month, our sales team once a month, to just kind of go over results, go over what we're seeing, share ideas of what's next. And our content calendar is actually planned out for the entire year.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's move on to content development. So we've got a good understanding of the audience. You understand what they're after. You've got a great product. You've developed key messages and you've trained your internal teams. What do you do next when you're developing the content strategy?
I mean, the strategy should naturally develop out of your groundwork. If you put in the work to understand your audience, listen to your internal stakeholders, you should know where your audience is and how they digest content. What do they prefer? Webinars, articles, videos, email? How do they prefer to get the content delivered to them? Your topics will actually naturally develop out of that groundwork as well, because you're talking to the key stakeholders in your business who are interfacing directly every single day with your customer base and prospects. So the topic areas will develop naturally out of that. And then it's a matter of being consistent. Make sure you're providing information consistently to your audience and via a number of different channels. And I mean, for us, it's really been about trying different things. And I am all about that. We've done a lot of testing over the past 3 years to kind of get us to where we are today and really understanding our audience. I mean, if you're just starting your program, I would absolutely recommend trying a number of different vehicles to deliver your content and see what works.
So how do you develop a culture where testing is encouraged, or does that comes from you down towards the team, or does it come the other way around? How does that work?
I think it comes from all of us. I mean, it's just kind of built in. I mean, we work for a science company, right? So testing is always encouraged, proving out your theories. So yeah, so that's just something that that I'm a big proponent of. Our CEO is absolutely supportive, and our senior team is supportive of the testing and trying different things. So luckily, we do have that top-down support. I know a lot of it's a challenge for communications folks in a lot of organizations, but we're very lucky to have that support, to have the C-level folks have the patience to let us test and try different things.
Sure. So giving you the confidence to, if it doesn't work out, it's not going to be no one's heads are going to be.
It's not the end of the world. No, it's not the end of the world. We need to know what's going to work.
Sure. And that's usually when the best ideas and thoughts happen, because you have that environment where you can test things
Absolutely.
out and get them the results.
Absolutely.
And so when you're developing for content, sort of content for specific channels, you want to maintain a consistency of message, like you mentioned in the presentation.
Yep.
Obviously, there's different formats. So if you're on social media, or if you're writing a white paper, or you're presenting in a webinar, these are all different formats that require sort of different types of content. So how do you maintain that sort of consistency of message?
I mean, it really also it comes down to your core message and being able to communicate it simply. And if you can't do that, you need to go back to the drawing board. I mean, if you can't say it in 3 or 4 words or less, then it's too much. Your core message should always be your core message. Do the brainstorm, do the work. Every month, my team gets together. We talk about how do we evolve? Is the baseline messaging still correct? Is it working? Looking at the different vehicles and tactics that we're using, and which messaging is resonating. What's causing people to convert? What's causing people to click through, and really develop from there.
Perfect. And then one thing that we talk about here a lot is the sort of content creation element versus the distribution, and how much resource should be put into each. And we run surveys all the time, and most people are putting most of their effort into the creation aspects, and then less so into the distribution. Is that the case? Would you recommend that? Is that the case at Cerion? What are your thoughts on it?
I think we put equal amounts of effort into creation and distribution. I mean, I think it's really important to develop good content. But if you have the content and it goes nowhere and doesn't get to your key audience, I think you failed. You really need to understand, again, where is your audience? How are they digesting content? And get yourself in front of them.
Yeah, and we were talking just before we came on air about, if you've got this quality evergreen content that exists, keep distributing it, because it's gonna, if there's sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's ongoing. It's living content. I mean, particularly in this industry, because I think the topics that you're talking about from a chemistry perspective are evergreen. They're not going away. The methodologies may improve. There may be some new technical innovations that you want to talk about or share, but I think for the most part, the content can live on.
Yeah. Talk about your audience. You mentioned earlier about the audience, and you did surveys, and you basically asked them how they consume content and the sort of content they like. Is that something you do regularly, or was that just a one-off and you use that as sort of the basis for the next sort of year or so?
So this is the first time we did a survey in the history of the company to the customer base. But this is after, as I mentioned, like 3 years of testing and really trying to hone down our messaging, hone the way that we deliver the content, and really now validate what we're seeing in the data. So being patient, looking at the data, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a week. It doesn't happen in a month. It takes months to develop it. I think we'll probably do a survey every year to make sure we're still on track. So I think it would be an annual thing. But this was the first one that we've done.
Awesome. I'm going to take a couple of audience questions, and then I'll come back to. I've still got a whole heap of questions for you, Tracy. A lot to get through. So there's been a question about 2D and 3D animation, and do you ever use 2D or 3D animation videos to explain complex concepts in nanotech? Is that something that you do?
So I will tell you that we did try to develop kind of kind of an animation video to talk about what we do, and we found it extraordinarily difficult to use animation so that it didn't come out too elementary, I guess, for the audience. So we find the written word for complex topics is really important, with kind of illustration, so to go along with it if necessary. But we did not really have success developing an animation. We couldn't get the pieces to work.
Sure. And then there's another question regarding social media, and they're asking, do you recommend using Twitter, LinkedIn, etc.?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Use all of those.
And how much so you mentioned about the CEO. So we did a podcast a couple of years, or about a year ago now, when we interviewed a guy who basically works about getting CEOs into social media. And he talked about some really interesting case studies of how he's helped them to develop huge followings and then drive revenue later on. So how involved are you with your sort of CEOs' social media, or is it all something they do themselves? And what is your sort of strategy company-wide social media?
Yeah, so from a social media perspective, our CEO is very good at it. So he does his own social media. From a company perspective, the marketing team runs the company sites. And I mean, our strategy is really to be consistent. So we post 2 to 3 times a week. We try to post new content. We try to post interesting information. We try to get people to download information. So we have some reference guides on our website. So we lead people back to the website to download those reference guides. So our strategy is just really around consistency and quality of information.
And are you trying out, or do you use any sort of other social media? So I think you'd be able to find some Meso Network TikToks floating around in the clouds. Are you looking at anything at the moment? Anything different?
No, I mean, we're really trying to stick to where we think the audience is. And we do know Twitter and LinkedIn are two vehicles that we know our folks in our core audience that we want to get to utilize pretty regularly. We're going to be doing some things with Meso Network. So we're really looking at opportunities where our audience is. So we're just kind of connecting the dots, and that's been over time. We've done some testing with some other media that really it didn't work out. So we don't have to use that type of media again.
Sure. I wouldn't encourage anyone to look for those TikToks, by the way, because I'm not so comfortable with a lot of them. But if you are on TikTok, then do check us out. You'll be able to see me throwing lightsabers around yesterday, or was it today? I can't remember. It's been a long day. Tracy, another question here about integrating research evidence from nanomaterial field into your communication strategies, or how do you approach that? I think you've covered that pretty much already. Anything further to add to that?
No, we operate, because we're a services company. We're a company that makes materials specific for products or systems for our customers. So we operate under very strict confidentiality agreements. So any of the research results are never published by us. So the things that we talk about are methodology, what we do as a company, our capabilities as a company, and how our process works.
Sure.
As a services business.
Yeah. Now, if we move on to sort of future-proofing, measuring success, things like that. So let's start off with how you measure success. So what sort of data points are you looking at that will help you to determine the success of your communication strategies?
Yeah, I mean, we look at data points across all of our communications channels, from the website to social media to more direct engagement, trade shows, webinars, downloads. The data helps us determine the demographics of our visitors. How engaged are they? How much time have they spent with our content? And if they come back, it helps us answer a few key questions. Are we hitting our target audience? How interested are they in the content? And are we a resource for them? What content's the most popular? And what content is, at the end of the day, getting conversions and really a part of that customer journey. So we are just starting to do some customer journey mapping. I haven't talked about that at all during this conversation or the presentation, but that's something that's also pretty important once you get a little farther down the road in your program, is really understanding the points at which anyone who ultimately converts to a contact or a sales qualified lead, what's the path that took them there, so that we see the patterns in which content is actually part of that conversion process and part of that customer journey. And then we develop other pieces around that, or similarly to those pieces.
So is that something you've just done recently then, or introduced recently, the customer journey mapping?
Yeah, so that's something that we've just started kind of in the past 6 months or so, is really understanding what the customer journey is. And it's not as easy to do as you might think. We have all kinds of marketing technologies that we've implemented to help us do that, but it's still pretty difficult.
Yeah, I think especially in these sort of complex buying journeys, people think, oh,
Yes.
they go from here to here to here, and then they'll buy this product. But in
Yeah,
reality, it's nothing of the sort, is it? It's like here, maybe a couple of years later, blah 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 blah. It's all
exactly.
over the place.
The sales journey is a long one.
Yeah. So you've enjoyed, or you found interesting insights from mapping the customer journey so far? Or has it been more of a challenge there than a benefit, would you say?
I mean, I think it confirms some of our suspicions about the way that our customers engage with us, which is, it's a long, convoluted process. So yeah, I mean, it's still a work in process, but I think we'll begin to understand more um, over the next few months as we, really, I think technology is a big part of it, and marketing technology, and implementing systems and analytics that can help you track across the board, and really consolidate that data and spit something out at the end that makes sense for you. So that's kind of what we're building.
Yeah, it's making the sense of the data. That's the key.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We've got a few more questions, guys. If you've got any more audience questions, please do throw those in the Q&A tab. I just want to draw everyone's attention to the handout section, which you can find next to the Q&A tab. We got some additional resources in there, some information. You can also connect with Tracy on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to Tracy and discuss anything that we've spoken about during the webinar today. Tracy, a few more questions, if that's all right with you.
Sure. Absolutely.
Brand champions. How do we ensure that we have both internal and external brand champions?
I mean, internally, it's really all about communication, keeping the internal teams engaged in what we're doing, how we're doing it. I mean, we have company meetings. I mean, we're kind of a small-ish team, so it's really easy for us to have a lot of hallway conversations, and engage with each other and collaborate. I mean, from an external perspective, there are two things, right? So from an external brand champion perspective, it's about customer success, really, right? Providing the best products and services, and at the end of the day, that's what matters. But the other part of being a brand champion, creating external brand champions, is really being a resource. And I mean, EZO Network knows this all too well, is really providing the content, the information, the data that helps people make decisions, or helps educate the audience. And I think that also creates brand champions.
So you mentioned you've got a smaller team, so it's easier for you.
It is.
What would you recommend if companies are working for huge sort of multinational companies? What sort of things can they do? Is it just what you said, but on a bigger scale, basically?
It is. And I mean, I think a lot of those larger companies send out employee newsletters, and send out internal communications. So if, as the communications and marketing folks, you could plug into the internal communications team within the organization and get yourself a section in that employee newsletter. And I mean, at the end of the day, there are probably a handful of folks that you work with consistently on the marketing and communications team. So they're your internal brand champions, and they will propagate. It'll go viral in your own company, right? So if you're working with a few people internally, they'll talk to a few people on their teams, and they'll talk to some other people. So I think it really propagates itself internally, even if you're only working with a handful of people. But it's also important to really get engaged with your internal communications teams in larger companies. I work for Panasonic, so I absolutely understand the challenge of working in a large company.
Yeah, I can imagine. What about, so obviously within Nanomaterials, the policies are changing all the time. There's often sort of, I don't want to say misinformation essentially. What are the best practices for keeping up to date with latest industry news, and also making sure that it's actually quality information that's being shared, and how can you make sure that you're up to date with everything?
I mean, just read. I mean, hit LinkedIn every day, get connected with your peers and into peer groups, industry organizations, connect with them, read what they've got going on their websites, and get on their newsletter lists. The Nanotechnology Industries Association has a very strong regulatory team, particularly for the EU. So from a regulatory perspective, I mean, that's probably your best resource for information. Industry associations also publish articles from the members. So, getting, detailed information about what's going on in the industry directly from peer companies is a great way to keep up to date. I mean, talk to your team, sales, technical folks, and if you have an internal regulatory team, they have a really good sense of what's new, what's topical, and what the buzz is, and what might be coming down the pipe, so you can be prepared for it.
Perfect. Tracy, I just want to finish off with a couple of, just two more questions. The first one, a bit more about yourself and your career. So can we talk about perhaps a sort of a biggest challenge you've had and how you've overcome it? Maybe a little anecdote about something that you could share with us?
Sure. I mean, in a word, COVID. I just started with Cerion. I started working at Cerion in November of 2019. Okay. Completely new industry, completely new company. I mean, understanding and learning. I was just getting up to speed, and we just started mapping out all the key branding and messaging improvements that we wanted to implement, and bang, COVID, a few months in. So talk about a challenge, new member of a company, new industry. How do I continue to learn? How do I build out this program with only remote interaction with our team? It was a gigantic challenge, but I think what we learned over time and what we decided to do was really focus on the things that we could make an impact with. And during COVID, the biggest impact that you can make is digital marketing. So we went about, redoing our entire website. That's what we did during COVID, and developing our digital advertising program, and some webinars and other digital formats, and partnering with some industry organizations to get our message out via webinars. So we kind of, pivoted, I guess, and shifted, and really said, okay, what's going to make the biggest impact for us? And it was the website, and it was, optimizing and growing our digital presence.
So COVID, obviously something that hit everyone, and it was, still is a crazy time, but as a leader within a new organization, how did you make sure that we're in a time of, this was obviously one of the biggest times of crisis. How did you make sure that your team remained calm, that the communications you were putting out there were clear and coherent? I'd imagine if you're just starting out, it's already pretty stressful, and then all of a sudden you've got all these people you're responsible for. So what would you do to keep your team calm in a time of crisis?
I mean, as long as you're prepared. I mean, you maybe have prepared for something else, another type of crisis, and you probably, if you've prepared and have a crisis communication plan for any type of crisis in your back pocket, you'll feel all right about it. You should be able to react calmly, clearly, in a smart way. As a professional, you would hope that people would react that way. And I mean, you really can't react until you have all of the information. You can't react when you're at an information disadvantage. And I think as communicators, we intuitively know that. And as long as you're honest, internally, externally, I think you're going to be fine. I mean, that's the most important thing. Just be honest.
Sure. I think that's a great point to finish on, Tracy. So thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us all today. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. We have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks, which is going to be about culture and brand building, specifically creating an authentic competitive advantage in a changing market. If you want to join us for that webinar, then all you have to do is click on the pop-up that should be appearing on your screen now. That will take you to the registration page, and we'd love to see you there. That should be another fantastic event. Tracy, thank you again. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure we can talk again sometime about some of this stuff. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Danny.
Take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days.